Good afternoon. I'm Muriel Bowser. We are located in the Martin Luther King Jr. Library. We have just completed our presentation of the FY25 supplemental and 26 budget to the Council of the District of Columbia. Our team is available for press questions. It's now 1:34. I think we could probably go till, we can go around until about 2 o'clock. Who wants to start? Yes, ma'am.
Last year, when you unveiled the sales tax increase proposal as well as an increase in the universal paid family leave tax, there was, a shortfall projection. There's also a shortfall projection by the CFO this year for over $1 billion through the financial plan. Why did you delay the sales tax increase and propose a decrease in the universal paid family leave tax considering those conditions?
Thank you. We have always expected to be in line with the region when it comes to the sales tax, and we believe that the regional discussion around sales tax is progressing, but it hasn't gotten there yet. So we will delay any increase in our sales tax in hopes that the region will catch up and it wouldn't put us out of place with the region. So we're not moving on it this year. As it relates to PFL, we did recommend what I call a tested level for PFL in our last budget that had an increase. The council exceeded that to a level we thought was too high. While we haven't been able to roll all of the delta back, we've started, and we started this year, and we think that is a very important signal to businesses that we are trying to retain and attract in the district.
Mary, you also pay for the RFK infrastructure investment are having the ballpark fee continued for businesses.
Yes.
Is this intended in any way that decreases for PFL to offset the cost that you're also asking businesses to pay for the stadium?
No. And so as you know, we've had a ballpark tax for many years, a ballpark fee, I don't know what do we call it, related to the development of Nats Park, which we think has knocked it out of the park, excuse the expression. But we've developed a neighborhood, we've attracted more residents, and we're able to pay off the bond early, which makes that funding stream available for another sports investment. So if you're asking me why are we looking at the PFL tax, we're looking at a whole host of initiatives to make the district more appealing to businesses that want to locate here and keeping businesses here. And we have to look at our tax structure. We have to look at policies that create additional costs for businesses, and we can flip to the growth agenda, especially downtown. Those include the parking cash out. That includes some of the cost related to our building standards. It also includes what it costs to develop here and creating some more certainty in that process, which is why we have the development review changes that we have. And so all of those are part of our growth strategies.
Peace and blessings, Madam Mayor. My first question is in regards to the FY25 supplemental. So in regards to the recent youth activity that spurred the curfew, what does youth programming look like this summer, given what we're facing? So is there still opportunity for late night youth programming, or what does that look like as far as the budget's concerned?
Well, I'll anticipate that we're going to continue to try to have new programs that engage kids, and we felt strongly that If we're closing down an avenue, which we must, then we should try to create new avenues. We will look at what those things cost and either handle them with what's available, or we may need to spend contingency funds to do that. The feedback that I've gotten, and maybe Deputy Mayor, you can chime in about the holiday hype. Was not a budgeted for activity, but we had 3 days of activity that DPR led that we stood up at Banneker Recreation Center.
Sure. So we obviously are always invested in keeping our kids engaged in positive activities. So holiday hype, we had over 700 young people over the course of the weekend, which, you know, we get videos of kids dancing and having a good time in a positive way, which is what we want all summer. So we'll continue to work with DPR, who's amazing, coming up with pop-up activations for our young people like they did this weekend. And then our summer planning has been going on for months and months and months. So whether it's SYEP for our young people, work with our schools, and a host of other programs we have planned with DC Housing Authority, with DPR, we'll continue to look for ways to make sure our kids are engaged just like we did this weekend. But we would say that that was a success, that with very little notice, 700 young people came, had fun, and went home safely.
In regards to safe passage, it's my understanding that with the FY25 supplemental, $3 million was cut this summer, and that the CBOs aren't being funded to provide that. So if that is in fact true, what contingencies are in place to ensure that young people this summer can get to and from school safely?
Sure. So, I mean, one of the things that how we even got to the 3 million number is actually looking at our utilization and really looking at, obviously during summer school, and we have lesser routes that we need to cover. So that's our first priority, is making sure that all of our routes are covered for summer school. And then also, because it's on fiscal year and not school year, that we have the coverage we need in August and September when school starts. Our additional programming that we're able to do, and we have additional funds, whether it's more camps or otherwise, we're going to look across the portfolio to make sure that we have all of the programming that we need to keep our kids engaged.
I got 2 more questions, y'all, real quick. What becomes of out-of-school time funding programming for the summer? And in the absence of a Ward 8 council member, who did your office consult in shaping the budget as it relates to them, the Ward 8 residents?
Well, that's a great question, and we, of course, have stayed engaged with stakeholders. The at-large council members, of course, represent all 8 wards, and I represent Ward 8. So we're very focused on continuing our investments in Ward 8. The first part of your question, I'm sorry. Out of school time. Let me ask Kevin and Jenny to respond to that. Sure.
Yes, so great question. We've already awarded our Summer Strong grants to all the CBOs for this summer, and all of that has been held intact. So we anticipate providing exactly the same level of service this summer that we have in summers past through our out-of-school time program grants through the office that sits with me.
Just to understand how the budget reductions for the supplemental budget work this year, are they taking effect right now, like as of this moment, or is there kind of a process for them to kick in?
Sure, Kevin.
That's a good question. So when we submitted our budget for 25 to the CFO, all those transactions, whether it's a person that's not getting hired, a contract, the CFO locked that money. In other words, that money cannot be spent. If the council were to say, we disagree with you freezing these 5 positions, and they find some other way to make up for that, then when the council would identify a new source of funding or cut, they could unlock or unfreeze those 5 positions. But the cuts that we have to comply with the CR and the spending pressures and the cash flow at the end of the year, that is locked until a change is made with an equal reduction or change elsewhere in the budget.
And just a quick follow-up, but if Congress were to restore the funding, would it also take, would it be a laborious process to restore those fundings to kick back in? Would it become moot after a certain point if they took too long, I should say?
No, the Congress should make the change, and then we'll make the change, and we'll do it expeditiously. Yes.
Raphael with Channel 9. Mayor, usually you're able to deliver remarks when you go before the council for the hearing. Obviously, that's not on the table right now. What is your message to the council? You got a little taste today of kind of what the next 70 days will look like as everyone kind of looks at the budget. Your message to them as they're making the decisions on what to keep and not to keep.
Well, we spend a lot of time. We think we have a sound budget, and we know we do. And we think it invests in the district's future. I think what we heard today is questions about programs and services that mean a lot to members of the council. Some of them also mean a lot to me. And we heard the push and pull it's going to take. Like, this means a lot to me, but we know we have fewer revenues. Well, if you know you have fewer revenues, then you have to make some tough decisions. Our path to deal with that is to grow the economy, to create more economic activity. So maybe some of the things that are on the table don't have to be on the table next year or the year after that. But it is not our choice to go to businesses or to go to residents and says, you have to pay more taxes. We think that we will be getting into an unsustainable decision-making loop of, I don't want to make hard choices. I don't want to do anything differently. I'm just going to keep asking businesses and residents for more money. And I don't think that's what the people of the EC hired us to do. Janetta.
So, Mayor Bowser, thank you. In your budget, you have reduced and or eliminated some programs that I think was said that they hadn't even started.
Yes.
For example, the Wealth Fund was one of them, the Child Tax Credit. You also have some reductions or issues with Medicaid. Can you give us an estimate of how many people or how many families are going to be affected by these reductions and or cuts? For example, ERAP is being reduced to a certain extent or shifted. So how many people can you say are going to be adversely impacted in some way by the changes that you're making to deal with the revenue shortfall and to deal with the CR?
I don't know that we have totaled up a number of all the participants in these programs, Janetta, or potential participants. I suppose we could. We do know with the change in the Medicaid program that Wayne has talked about, I think we have 25,000 people who could be impacted. And there are trade-offs, right? So you ask me who is going to be affected by changes in the Wealth Fund or the Child Tax Credit. What I'd say is we've invested in what I think most council members have pointed out to me was a higher priority when it comes to that group of people, young people, pre-K. And that is in investing in the PKEEP program and in the pay equity program. And so there are some trade-offs that we looked at, and the example that you raised have to do with preschool children or children who need childcare, and we made some decisions about those two priority programs.
Could we just ask you also, if I could, to talk a little bit about the changes that you are making with respect to, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
With respect to this, your 2026 budget, and you're looking at some of the changes with respect to the general fund being $13 billion, but that wasn't a change. That's all of the stuff. But you're looking at your budget without necessarily looking at what the federal government is anticipating, or are you anticipating that what is going on in Congress right now may in fact impact some of the budget decisions that you've made? How do you see those things intersecting? I guess that's the question I'm asking.
I think that we are prepared for to have to react to federal changes. We don't know what they are, however. We don't know what they're going to be. But I do think that we're prepared to react quickly to them. Like, we can't build a budget based on some anticipated change that would increase revenue for us or decrease revenue for us. We have to go on the forecasted revenue that we have. Now, the CFO is required to update that. Is it 3 times or 4 times a year? 4 times a year. The next one will be on June 30th. And then he would have to take into account everything that's kind of going on in the national and global sense that affects our economy. And then the budget process would proceed. The council has the budget now. And if we are required to make changes to our budget throughout the year, that would be something that I propose to the council.
For the federal side of the budget, which is what I'm also looking at, there is the talk of doing block grants as opposed to actually statewide block grants for education, block grants for health, block grants for everything. Have you looked at that in terms of the preparation of your budget and in terms of some of the concerns that the council has made, especially about housing?
I'm trying to think of the concerns I heard around housing. We're very focused on the fact that we were able to get back to our HPTF investment of $100 million. We continue to invest in HPAP, and we've made some changes to the HPAP program as well. We have many millions of dollars of investment, and a question was raised about the housing authority. Our new communities are proceeding at Berry Farm. What are the
Northwest one, Park Morton, and Bruce Monroe.
So we continue to be very pleased about that. And a question about block grants, I don't know if we have anything else to add about that, because until these policies change, it's hard to make up for them. Although, Paul, I will turn to you because we've pretty intensively looked at changes that we've already seen to the Department of Education because of the proposal to eliminate it.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. And I think I'll just say very simply that we actually are in an incredibly fortunate position as Washington, D.C., vis-a-vis the threat to turn some of these specific programmatic grants into block grants, because we have OSSI overseeing what would be the new block grant. And right now, we don't anticipate a decrease in funding for Title I or our special education dollars, but we are understanding they're looking at converting those into block grants at the same amount, in which case we are very well positioned to be able to distribute those in pretty much exactly the same way that we do the current programmatic funding for those large grant programs.
Thank you. Yes.
With respect to RFK, thanks for holding that.
Could you just introduce yourself? I'm sorry.
Matt with WSA 9.
Okay.
It's me and Rafa here. So I was wondering, with respect to RFK, I know with the capital budget for 2026, it's not a one in, one out, but there has to be, I'm sure, some money sort of shifted around, so to speak, to cover the RFK project. I mean, between the jail no longer sounding like it's going to be a priority. Also, you talked about the ballpark fund. I guess the question most people would have is, where does money come from that's going to pay for the RFK site that you propose?
Well, I think the city administrator has already noted that we have, and people should know, our ability to use capital changes from year to year. Given that we have a local cap, it still changes from year to year, and we frequently have additional capital borrowing space available. So it's not necessarily true that we added $500 million, or it's not exact, it's 500, it's 856, I think, 856 in this budget then we had to move 856. So that's not the case. And so other changes that you see in the capital budget are more likely related to our decision not to use that space in our capital borrowing ability for that purpose. And as we've mentioned with some of them, holding, for example, with the jail, $400 million without adding $1 billion would not give us a new jail. So we had to make a decision. We had to make a decision about that. Does that answer your question? Did you want to add anything to that?
If I could just add one other important feature, is that the CFO's team, who has some outstanding minds when it comes to public financing, did a debt reissuance. And so imagine like a homeowner, imagine when interest rates were lower, refinancing a house. Same house, same principal debt, but you suddenly are able to have more funding available to maybe apply to a different investment. So CFO was able to unlock, I understand, about $800 million in debt capacity from refinancing old debt that was disadvantageous in the current environment. The Capital One Arena investment from a year ago, we didn't make trade-offs for that either. It actually was another debt refinancing that the CFO did, timing it perfectly, that allowed for that additional capital to be made available a year ago. So it's not just not a one in, one out. There's this very important feature of the CFO constantly and very smartly refinancing and restructuring the existing debt that can free up capacity without having to cut anything.
And just to add one more thing to that, sorry, is in addition to what the city administrator and mayor said, if you look at the capital budget, you'll see our school modernizations. Unless the community requested a change, the timelines didn't change. Public recreation facilities, still on track, didn't change. Public libraries, we actually increased the funding to meet the new construction costs. Timelines didn't change. So the mayor was very laser focused on preserving all of those assets that we know residents depend on. And through the creative work of the CFO, we were able to make room to also accommodate RFK.
Yep.
David Kaplan with Fox 5 here. Two questions. The first, just what is your message to people who are concerned about low-income residents themselves, who are going to see potential reductions to things like TAMF, changes to eligibility requirements for Medicaid, things that ultimately will save the district money? What do you say, first of all, to those who are concerned that some of these cuts may impact some of the lowest income residents in the district?
Well, I think the right sizing of our budget affects every sector. It affects every cluster. All the deputy mayors here and all of the directors around me have recommended ways to right size our budget. So everyone is impacted in that way. And what I say to them is that we have to have what I say to everyone is we have to have a city that grows. We can't invest in the best schools if we don't have revenue to do that. We can't have the types of human services programs that we've invested in if we don't have revenues. You can look all around this region and you will not find a jurisdiction that has the type of aging services that we have in the district. And in order for us to be able to have them, we have to have more jobs, more businesses, more people. You won't find anywhere in this region the types of homeless services that we offer in the District of Columbia. And if we are to maintain those, we have to have more businesses, more people paying taxes. We won't be able to continue to have outsized programs that nobody else in the country offers without being able to grow businesses and residents who live here. And we also can't act like today is 2024 or 2023. It's not, folks. Okay? We have a shifting economy. And if we don't shift with it, we will be a city that people flee. Okay? And we can't have that.
And just a quick second question. Some of these funds and some of these programs have zero next to them for 27, 28, and 29. I know that, as your growth agenda, as you hope that it grows and brings in additional revenue, that those numbers will not be zero.
Yeah.
But I hate to ask what if the numbers don't, what if the revenue doesn't come in? What if what you're hoping to do isn't?
What program are you talking about?
Just some of the ones where the 4-year projections
Okay.
were, when you look at the 4-year, that are funded for 26, but not 27, 28, and 29. Yeah, just what happens if, not enough money comes in based on what you're trying to do with your growth agenda, and those programs need to stay at lower levels than they've been in years past.
I think you just answered your question. That's the answer. And every household understands that. You have enough money, and if you don't have enough money, something has to go, or you have to make more money. It's that simple. And so the way we make more money, our path is growth. Some other people will suggest just raising taxes. And what I know about what we're facing and Deputy Mayor Albert's efforts is when we're talking to businesses, they talk to us about how much more expensive it is in the district than it is in Virginia. When I'm talking to DC restaurants, they say, why do we have this 82 and they don't have it in Virginia? When I talk to restaurant workers, they say, why am I making less money because of this I-82 and they don't have it in Virginia? When I'm talking to affordable housing developers, they say, why did we go from being #1 in building affordable housing and attracting capital investment, and now we're almost at the bottom? Because of DC laws. That's why. And so we have to choose a path to grow our economy and not overcharge our residents and businesses. That has to be our path. And people expect us to do that hard work and to do it in a way. I think Councilmember McDuffie closed out perfectly. How do we grow? And how do we grow fairly? I always say to my staff, our job is to deliver the fastest for the most people. And that's what we aim to do. Yep, Mark.
Mayor Bowser, I want to follow up on David's first question, and I get the different pots of money, and I get refinancing for the stadium, and you're wanting to attract businesses and residents, but the optics that people are going to see are, $500 million for Capital One, $1 billion for an NFL stadium, at a time when you want to kick more than 25,000 DC residents off of Medicaid.
Mark, that's not true.
That is true.
No, it's not.
That's exactly the numbers that you're giving us, that your proposal would move 25,000 DC residents off of Medicaid.
And into?
But that's something that they would have to do, and then they would have to pay for. I just asked the deputy.
It would be paid for by their federal subsidy.
They would have to pay out of pocket for that.
Get the basic health plan, it may be designed in a way where their costs are negligible.
But my question
is, okay, go ahead with your question.
Again, this seems like very much pro-business, and it doesn't ask anything of the wealthiest people in the district, but it asks a lot of the most vulnerable and poorest people, from paid family leave to the child tax credit to TANF to 25,000 people losing Medicaid. This is a city that has prided itself on decades for having health care coverage for everybody. What do you say to those residents who are going to look at this and feel like they are carrying an undue burden that, again, the wealthiest people in this city are not being asked to carry?
Well, we already have among the highest taxes for high earners in this region, and I dare say on the East Coast, we have among the highest taxes. And when those taxes were increased on high earners, I said at the time, we don't need it, don't do it. We did it anyway. And we created more programs that now today we can't afford. And that you conflate, and what I would say to anybody who conflates any right sizing of the operating budget with RFK Stadium, if RFK Stadium does not proceed, it would be a big mistake, but if it didn't, we would still have the same operating budget recommendations. Doesn't change it. Yes.
Lou Chavarro here, the Washington Blade. On the budget, going back quickly to the fiscal year 2025 supplemental, the charts were showing that there will be a $175 million reduction in non-personnel services. And in that, I understand it was said earlier that it may include community-based grants. I was wondering, as you may know, many in the LGBTQ community are concerned about the possible cuts due to the congressional imposition and so forth, but they're concerned that some of the community-based grants, some of which come out of your Office of LGBTQ Affairs, may hurt local community organizations. Do you have any message for them about where things stand?
I'm not prepared today to go through that entire list, but we will throughout the budget process, and I'm not sure if we can speak to the specific question raised right now.
Sure. Just in terms of the community affairs grants, there are no reductions to those in FY25.
Mayor Rebecca with 7 News. Thank you for taking questions. If you touched on this a little bit, if you can talk about what went into the decision with reducing certain programs as the financial plan continues. So say the violence interrupter program, was that because we have a similar program with OAG? If you can kind of talk about how that decision came about.
The OAG runs a violence intervention program and has for a number of years. For next year's budget, I keep qualifying as my understanding because I don't always have full visibility, that there is unbudgeted revenue. So revenue that exceeded what's in the budget is typically money that can be used for any number of purposes. For our purposes, we use excess revenue to the litigation support fund that was not budgeted for, as well as excess revenue to just about every other fund across many, many agencies, to be able to help with balancing with the idea that it's not in the financial plan, it's not in the budget. There was at least a couple of investments that this OAG intended to make with the excess revenue. One was to a grant program that largely funds Cure the Streets. Another one is for access to a database involving litigation. That funding, which is excess funding, we've used for balancing because it was not applied to any program, as we did for every other agency just about that had excess funding. So the point I was making with the council is that we have in our budget violence intervention programs which have had demonstrably positive effects on the city that are funded across at least 3, likely 4 different agencies: OAG, the ONE's Office, Office of Victim Services and Justice Grants, and DYRS. There's going to have to be a discussion, and we left those intact except for the one that was not in the 26 budget to begin with. I suspect what will happen, I think the questions you heard today from the council, is that they will deliberate upon looking at all these investments collectively as having the same mission and purpose to prevent gun violence. How do you pool them or distribute them in a way that has the highest, best use of taxpayer funding for an impact? That may conclude in July with additional funding for Cure the Streets. It may be a unified budget with the ONE's Office. It may be doubling down on work that DYRS does, but I think there'll be a discussion from a policy standpoint about the different streams of funding, all of which have grown dramatically over the past few years as to how to best use them.
Yes.
Dorothy Brazil, DC1. I had a question, but first I wanted to ask the city administrator. In your exercise that you indicated you began in March about asking parts of DC government to identify savings they could make in personnel program and travel and other things, did you ask that of all DC government agencies as well as independent agencies?
We did ask the mayor's order and the CA's order for all agencies. However, those orders legally only apply to ones that report to the mayor. So if they're independent, it is, and we got largely outstanding like feedback and responsiveness from the independents, but legally, they're independent. The mayor has the authority to submit a budget under home rule as she sees fit. Office of Inspector General is a budget that we submit. There's more restrictions upon that, though they are very collaborative with all these processes. But legally, it applies to mayoral reporting agencies. Functionally, we had broad buy-in and collaboration across the board.
I would like to follow up then with a question to the mayor. On slide number 8, you indicate reductions to close the gap were made in paragraph 2, column 2. We saved $100 million in efficiencies through lease savings, energy savings, telecom savings, and smarter deployment of resources across the financial plan. Is it possible for us to get a list of those savings and attributed to what departments and agencies? Moreover, how do you, when you're in the midst of a fiscal year, make a savings in lease payments?
Well, this is a 4-year financial plan, so I don't know if we have any lease savings, but I will tell you our DGS teams have been actively renegotiating leases, and we have achieved lease savings over the course of this year and probably the previous year as well. But the number that we refer to in this slide is over 4 years.
I don't want to belabor the point, but I've had this conversation with Mr. Donahue
Okay.
a few months ago. In terms of, in the past 6 months, I've visited 4 different departments and agencies, and more than half of their office space is vacant. Okay?
Which ones?
DC Board of Elections has half a floor at Half Street vacant. DGS, I don't know the different floors. The Department of Human Resources, no one at home. And the Deputy Mayor for Planning and Economic Development has half a floor on Half Street. No one there. And let me give you an example when I say no one's there. The additional space the Board of Elections has on Half Street, not only aren't there any employees, there aren't any computers, and there are no telephones. So it's obvious it wasn't just the day I visited that there wasn't anybody there. I refer to them as ghost offices, okay? So, I think serious savings could be made in leasing.
Okay, well, you're speaking my language because first of all, let me just say this, Ms. Brazil. It is my expectation that people report in person to work according to our telework policy. This Budget Support Act expands the mayor's telework policy to the independent agencies. We made this suggestion last year, which the Board of Elections is one. We made this suggestion last year and the council took it out. So I hope that the council maintains this policy expansion with this budget. The CA knows my concerns about making sure that we can say with certainty that our agencies are compliant with those policies, and we will continue to look at it. We have no issue, and I don't know if we have some recent examples where we can talk about, we're saying, agency, you have this lease coming up. Do we need to think about doing anything differently when it comes to your space? Now, having said that, let me just add this last point. We have more employees than we did so we have more employees every year. So my expectation is that we need the space, but if we don't, then we'll adjust it.
Let me just add a footnote to what
Okay.
The reason I had the conversation with the city administrator back in August was because the Board of Elections was making a case that it needed additional space to tabulate the mail-in ballot. And when he said this to me, I said, why? They have a half a floor on Half Street that is not being used. And then I had someone go over there and take photographs. I dare say I'm concerned about there's a need for real savings and real right sizing of the DC government. And I'm just curious about the exercise you understood. and the fact that it maybe needs to continue.
Okay, and I don't mean to suggest, no one should take from this that our examination of our expenses is over. In fact, there were some questions about, I think the council member was alluding to an expenditure commission, which we don't support creating another agency to, examine spending, but we are repurposing some FTEs in the city administrator's office that focus on what we focus on is unsustainable programs and when I mean that are programs that are growing faster than our level of growth as a city, which means over time, we just won't be able to afford them. And how do we make those programs more affordable? So it could be like in the case of Medicaid, that now instead of having this certain program or insurance package, you have this insurance package. And effectively, you're getting the same thing, but it's packaged in a different way that is in fact sustainable. Okay, and I note that we're 15 minutes past our time, but I'll take a few more. And you haven't asked yet.
Yes, Marielle with DC News Now. Mayor, can you kind of just talk us through how you're feeling at this moment? Because this has been a unique budget process, and you've had to deal with a lot of different competing pressures from Congress to the federal job cuts to council saying we need the budget now. Where is it? So how has it been for you to kind of deal with these competing pressures?
Well, we feel very good today. It's budget day, which is always a good day for us. We recognize that we have hard decisions. We presented hard decisions. So we approach this conversation with seriousness, but we're proud of the work we've done and the decisions we've made. And it is a budget for DC's future. It's not a budget for DC of 2 years ago or DC last year. It's for DC's future. And I also feel good about this, and I'm grateful to DC residents for allowing me to serve this long, because I know that we know how to deal with all of these competing pressures. And we've done it calmly, and I think we've done it in a way that is going to minimize impact on DC residents. For example, some have said you approach budgeting with a chainsaw or sledgehammer. We have looked at these cuts in a way that have, we think, the least impact on how the city grows and on all of our people. Okay, last two?
Yeah, Janae
Oh,
with
three?
Axios.
Mhm.
Sorry, this might, at the risk of repeating yourselves maybe, but about RFK Stadium, can you confirm no library, schools, or other public rec centers, the timelines were pushed or delayed, or the funding was trimmed because of the RFK Stadium project?
Yes, there were 2 schools whose timeline shifted based on the community request for a different set of swing space. Other than that, nothing.
And in terms of, I mean, I wish the CFO was here, but the debt refinancing done, do we know the details of that? Will the city have to pay over a longer period of time more, or how was that done? Does anyone know?
I would have to turn to them for the specifics, but I will say that the refinancing saved us money on our debt service payments. And that's reflected in 25, where we saw the most savings. I think it was around $68 million. And then there were additional savings in the out years.
And we don't mean to connect the two. The CFO regularly looks for the best ways or how we get the best rates for our borrowing. And we have a lot of borrowing. We have a 10 or 9 billion? 10 billion. A $10 billion capital program. So all of the things that we've been able to do are funded with that capital spending. So they're always looking for ways to get us better rates and better payments.
Many thanks. My question, I'm going to get a bit in the weeds here, and if you've already gone over this, please forgive me. But in regards to cutting the red tape and reducing barriers to growth, how much revenue do you anticipate generating within the 4 fiscal years, and how did you calculate that? And the same question applies to the $4 billion in revenue that I heard being mentioned as it relates to RFK. So specifically, like, where did those calculations come from as it relates to the anticipated revenue for both of those things?
So on RFK, we of course have done economic analysis as it relates to how we generate revenue, ancillary development, income taxes paid, all of those things. And we will be talking about those in more detail. But we have a pretty sophisticated economic team that has helped us calculate those revenues. And as Kevin, who went through all of the lines of the Excel spreadsheets, he told me, is conservative. All right. So like, these are conservative estimates. They could be a lot bigger impact. And the first part, I'm sorry.
For the red tape and reducing barriers
Yeah.
to growth, how much do you anticipate generating over 4 fiscal years, and how did y'all come to that amount?
I don't. Go ahead.
So any revenues scored would be done by the CFO's office. So anything would be in the fiscal impact statement. On the red tape and reducing barriers to growth slide, so slide 10, there are some of these items that they scored as having a net revenue generation. There are others like the sales tax delay that cost us revenue. And then there are others that they can't quantify yet. So we will know in the upcoming revenue forecasts, once the policies start to take hold, then we should see the revenue being scored. I can't, but we can follow up with the fiscal impact statement that would total them across all the different slides of the growth agenda.
Yep. One thing on just a point of clarity on, I guess it was the previous slide. There is for the 27 to 29 financial plan years, a top line number on cuts. What's the top line number on FY26? Someone can answer that.
So the top line number of cuts for FY26 is around $250 million of reductions. And then there's also about $500 million of cost avoidance.
And some of those programs, about $243 million was savings from not starting programs that have yet to actually go into effect. But you're saying, sorry, I just want to make sure I'm understanding correctly, $250 million is the top line reduction?
Mm-hmm. That's correct.
And what is the category of the second number that you mentioned?
So that would be the cost avoidance. So throughout the slide presentation, we talked about policy changes that we made to bring down the cost of programs year over year. So when we talked about the Medicaid changes, when we talked about the changes to TANF, those were avoiding costs by making those policy changes.
Okay. And so is 250 a net then? Because obviously we see some programs have far more than like $7 million in cuts when you are looking at individual programs.
So it's 243 is the top line number, and those are reductions. That's not taking into account increases in other parts of the budget.
And so 243 includes not only programs that haven't started, but across all programs.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. And then I guess my last question for the mayor would be some of the major economic growth items on your agenda, namely, of course, RFK. Stadium's not expected to, if it were to stay on track, open until 2030. But some of the concerns, raised by council members or others about cuts, could go into effect as soon as next year. So I'm curious what in your agenda you think would offset some of the cuts as soon as next year, as far as what would be a catalytic investment to the tune of, $350 million is like the anticipated shortfall.
Not losing 40,000 jobs. And so we continue to work on retaining the jobs that we have and attracting more jobs and more people in those jobs. The most when we talk about economic activity loss, it's related to employed DC residents. So we have to get our people in good paying jobs, and we have to continue to attract good paying jobs.
Are there any specific line items that you point to that you feel like within a year would get the city to that, to save 40,000 jobs? I don't think there's one line item. They all hang together.
the whole budget works together, so I don't think we can point to one line item. If we go back to the growth agenda, we can kind of walk down it. But part of it is when we're talking about doubling down on business attraction, having more people, making sure that we are attracting through our DMPED efforts companies that are hiring DC residents. So our business attraction strategies are changing, and we have to work more on that. The more we're able to get development projects started sooner and not mired in kind of regulatory or legal morass, the sooner we are able to get taxpayers and people on the tax rolls. So all of these things are aimed to say DC is a good bet to do business and to get started. So I'm not sure if I'm answering your questions, but all of these things together will help us spur economic growth. There's not one thing that replaces, that I'm aware of, $330 million in 1 year. But all of them working together will help us. I don't know, Kevin, if you want to add to that. And neither, by the way, nobody is saying that the stadium creates $330 million in 1 year. That's not the argument.
The only thing I would add, Mayor, is sort of highlighting something that did not actually get discussed at length here, which is some of the investments we're putting in business attraction. So our largest employer is the federal government. They're having fewer employees, so we are doubling down on what we know we're good at, which is entertainment, sports, technology, healthcare, education. So there's actually a pretty meaningful shift when you go into the budget detail about what it means to double down on business attraction that by a pretty significant order of magnitude increases funding that we've traditionally put into business attraction significantly.
Yeah, I'll also just say, all the investments in the capital budget generate jobs. You said that the stadium doesn't open until 2030. That's correct. But construction on the stadium could begin as early as next year. So there'll be jobs generated through our capital projects. But when it comes to business attraction strategies, companies continue to see the long-term value of being in the District of Columbia, and they've always come to the district. Private companies have always come to the District of Columbia because of the talent that we have here. And so how do we hold that talent captive and make sure that they see the opportunities? And so we're going to employ a variety of strategies that include, reskilling, retooling, matching employers to available employees now, but attracting businesses that we know are growing. And there's a number of different sectors. Tech is a big sector that touches almost every part of our economy now. And so we see opportunities to not only retain and grow businesses that are already here, but also to attract new.
Mayor, let me just ask you one question before we leave. The budget is $23 billion. That's up from this current fiscal year, despite the cuts that you've made,
yes,
the reductions that you've made. Some people looking at that will say that this city still is of a mind, still on a spendthrift kind of mindset, despite the changes that you've made. There is really not any significant downsizing of the cost of government. How do you respond to that?
I think that we are significantly addressing how, and I call it kind of right-sizing, looking at the revenues coming in and looking at what we need to invest in. And I don't believe we get to what I was just discussing with Megan, more businesses, more employees, more residents, by not having great schools, safe streets, and fantastic parks and transportation. So we are going to invest in those things that make us a great city to live in, to work in, to raise a family in. And we want to be an inclusive city. So I don't want to lose sight on that. That's why we're going to make sure that we have a great human services program, aging services, affordable housing programs, all of those things allow us to grow residents, businesses, and employees. And so we think that the points that are important is we've been criticized before for spending money, spending more money than what was coming in a given year, or using fund balance. And I think in this financial plan, we're not doing that. So we're going to be structurally balanced. And we're making sure that we're looking at those programs that are growing faster than our revenues and saying now is the time to make some decisions about that. We're looking at policies that we're outliers in. We're outliers in the region, and in some cases, we're outliers nationally. Looking at what I-82 is doing to our restaurant industry, making sure that we have the types of insurance programs that are good for our people, good for our hospital networks, but also sustainable for our city. So I think we're doing all of those things, but we don't do ourselves any favors by cutting our budgets in draconian ways that hurt our people or that hurt our long-term growth. So I think that we found that balance, and I think that the fact that we've been able to do it with not raising anyone's income taxes, without raising residential property taxes, without raising commercial property taxes, and with being fair across the board. Thank you.